5:15 or 5:16. We have a quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. You will see in front of you there's a revised agenda, and in looking over it, I talked with Holly about it because we had the business survey on first, and last time we talked about that, we had a lot of discussions, so we have a lot of items that we need to cover, and I guess we have to be out of here like 6:15 to join the other meeting that we have at 6:30. So the first item in the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I had a discussion with Holly about the minutes. They become much more abbreviated, and I said there's really no discussion of all the points that we raised about, the 5-year plan, et cetera, et cetera. So I think at some point in time in the future, it would be worthwhile to have a little longer discussion and see legally what do we need to do and what is the opinion of the commission as to, what we'd like to see included in the minutes, and then give staff some direction. So I would entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
A motion made and seconded. We have any further discussion or additions and corrections? If not, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda, Holly, is the update on Port Authority economic development programs.
All right. Good evening, President Erickson, Mayor Bussing, Commissioners. I am here before you to give you a general update on some economic development programming that is been developing in the city. Next slide, please. I think if you use the arrow, it should work. Thank you. Perfect. So you may have remember seeing this document before. We put this together about a year ago to start to assemble the idea that the Port Authority was going to grow as an economic development entity and start to incorporate more services to support the business community and the economic development here in Bloomington. And so we drew that out with the understanding that we are working with businesses at every stage, from ideation, planning, and startup, through early stage and launch, operating, growing, expanding, and relocation. That growing and expanding and relocation was work that the Port Authority had already been doing, especially with some of our large employers, helping them with state and federal grants. But these early stage entrepreneurs were not groups that we had been working with yet. So we really wanted to sketch out how we were doing that. Some of those services that are getting built out are sitting within the city of Bloomington. They include information, connection, and promotion in different programs, as well as grants, loans, and incentives. And then we also work with a number of partners with technical assistance and consulting. And with the interest of City Council and the Port Authority Commission with these programs, but particularly Council, some of these programs have grown in different parts of the city organization, not necessarily in the port. But as the port expands, as we work on our economic development plan, and as the city starts to work more and more closely on these initiatives, we wanted to share some of those with you. Some of them the port will become more involved with. Some of them the port may provide an advisory role, but we just want to make sure you are aware of them as part of the suite of services that we offer to our business community. Next slide, please. No. All right, thank you. So Bloomington, you may be familiar with. This is the Youth Workforce Development Program that the city has been growing. We'll be going into the third year of the program in 2025. It launched in 2022. It was a collaboration between the Office of Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging and Community Development. It's geared towards youth age 16 to 24 who live or go to school in Bloomington, and matches youth with internship experiences at employers within Bloomington. And the goals of that program are to connect youth with barriers to employment to career pathways and a professional network, build a workforce development pipeline across Bloomington, address internal and external hiring challenges, diversify the city's workforce, and engage with youth in the community. It's 8 or 12-week paid internships. There's professional development and leadership training built into the program, and it's modeled after Minneapolis Step Up and the Brooklink program in Brooklyn Park. Next slide, please. Thank you. One more. All right, so in 2024, there were 15 students placed. A few were at MOA and Larkin Hoffman, but the majority of them were placed here in the city, primarily because we did not have those connections yet with our large employers. And so our goal in 2025, and the role that Port will be playing, is to increase the number and variety of employer partners enrolled in the program, expand internship offerings in popular interest areas, particularly STEM, and then expose students to industries and career paths with a range of educational requirements, including apprenticeships, technical or associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, and professional degrees. Next slide. Thank you. And so we have at this point connected with approximately 20 employers here in Bloomington that have not been acquainted with the program before, and we are hoping to firm up some of those placements by the end of 2024 for 2025 and continue to grow awareness here. This is an important program for the city. It supports the city's Bloomington Tomorrow Together priorities of a connected and welcoming community and a community with equitable economic growth. But it also supports the Port's 5-year objective of a talent attraction and retention. In 2025, we are taking a temporary approach to managing this program. It has not had a single owner in the past, and so with some staff transition, we're taking the opportunity to try and level out the program, and we will be hiring a temporary facilitator in 2025. It will continue to have a lot of involvement from the Office of Racial Equity, Inclusion and Belonging and Human Resources. But the Port Authority is being asked to manage the person that is going to facilitate the program and be the key facilitator for 2025. So with that, we would be hiring a temporary Bloom facilitator position that would be split as far as funding source goes between the city and the Port. And then in 2026, we'd be looking to evaluate the program moving forward. And so that anticipated cost from the Port side would be between $50,000 and $70,000 for the coming year. And that source would actually be from funds that were unspent this year related to the Small Business Center. We have not advanced that project yet. It is still under discussion, but those funds were set aside for programs that promoted equitable economic development, and the city sees this as an opportunity to do that type of work. So we anticipate returning to you in January to make that budget adjustment, but I just wanted to make you aware of the program and the ask. Next slide, please. The next program that we wanted to discuss quickly was Hatch Bloomington. This is a pitch competition that took place last year to put a small business here in Bloomington into a brick and mortar store. It had a $100,000 prize. It had a lot of coverage. We had a partnership with the Minneapolis Chamber, so $50,000 came from the city and $50,000 came from the Chamber. The goals of the program were to support existing and growing small business community in Bloomington, position Bloomington as an attractive location for outside investment, to build and maintain a pipeline of up-and-coming entrepreneurs, and to strengthen partnerships between the city and other drivers. There were 117 applicants, with 64 accepted into the program. 10,000 community votes were cast for the winners. 92 different publications wrote about the program, reaching an estimated 54 million readers. And then we achieved $650,000 in earned media for this. And the winner was Scramblin' an Egg. I hope you've tried this food truck, and soon you will be able to try it in a brick and mortar space. So we are currently looking at the second-year program. This program is run by Sean Lundy, the Special Projects and Initiatives Manager out of Community Development. And in the future, we may have him come back and give a more in-depth story about it. The next thing that we wanted to...
So, Holly, you're planning on egging somebody on again next year?
Hey! We'll play that joke for you in the future. All right. Next slide, please.
I think you can forget it.
All right, Bloomington Economic Partnership. This actually evolved from the Bloomington Workforce Initiative that the mayor had spearheaded. And if he wants to make any remarks after this, I will certainly let him do so. But it is a public-private initiative led by the city of Bloomington with industry and academic leaders involved. And the vision for 2030 is to build a resilient, dynamic economy for the future through a multifaceted strategy that includes Bloomington Economic Partnership's focus on improving access to quality jobs, fostering business growth, and enhancing the city's identity as a top talent destination. The mission is to position Bloomington as a leader in job creation and regional competitiveness by fostering an environment conducive to business growth and sustainable employment opportunities. And the objectives are to engage key stakeholders, build organizational infrastructure, communicate success, and identify investment opportunities. There are actually 5 committees that are currently set up. They meet quarterly. There's an executive committee that has oversight of this program, and then 4 subcommittees that focus on business and large employers, training and education, inclusion, and branding and positioning. There are city staff on these committees as well. And so we're right in the process now of starting to build out the 2025 calendar for these groups. There's intended to be a lot of cross-collaboration and discussion between them. There are a lot of topics that are interesting to everyone. For example, local purchasing or how we brand and talk about the city. So again, if you'd like to learn more about this in the future or come to one of these meetings, you'd be welcome to. And Sean Lundy, Special Projects and Initiatives Manager, is the project manager on this as well. And Mayor Bussey, did you want to say anything about this? Okay, great. And then CEO Summit is the final item here. Next slide, please. And this is planned to be a gathering of approximately 20 of the business leaders here in Bloomington. Also a vision of the mayor to bring the CEOs together into a private conversation to help build rapport with the city and discuss what the business environment here is in Bloomington and how we can work better together in the future. The goal is to make it an annual event, and there are more updates to come. Any questions there? Any questions about any of these programs?
I don't see any, Holly, so I think
All right.
you did a good job presenting.
Okay. I think we can.
Okay, well, the next item then we have is the Port Authority, and there's no action on that item, so Port Authority budget and levy.
All right, President Erickson and commissioners, thank you for having us back for a discussion of the Port Authority budget. As you recall, last time we voted on the levy and discussed the budget, but elected to bring the budget back again due to an omission in the packet and also just to give a little bit more detail into this budget. It is very similar to what you saw in August of this year, minor changes, but we are happy to go through it again. And the Port Authority accountant, Mary Kay Heinen, is here as well for questions afterwards. All right, next slide, please. All right, so as a reminder, as we look at our work, the Port's mission and objective is to provide economic development for the city of Bloomington. And we do this through 3 main areas: development and redevelopment services, business assistance, which is our newest area, and creative placemaking. And we support the city's Bloomington Tomorrow Together priorities of a connected and welcoming community supported by creative placemaking and business outreach, and a community with equitable economic growth supported by our business assistance and development work citywide. Next slide. So as a reminder, for our timeline, the Port has undergone quite a lot of change in the last several years. In 2022, Port expansion citywide was identified as a goal in the HRA assessment. And in 2023, this was the first year of the Port expansion, and it was funded by a new levy transfer of $1.4 million from the HRA to the Port. And the Port was able to start offering business assistance services for the first time. In 2024, the Port imposed its first levy of $1.5 million and began its 5-year strategic plan process, which is nearly concluded. And then in 2025, we requested and was approved for a $2.5 million levy. And some of the major changes there that we'll talk about in a moment were funding reserves, seeding a strategic acquisitions fund, and preparing for 5-year plan projects that will be coming forward. Next slide. So in our 2025 budget, you'll see, as we get along in the program, a total budgeted revenue of $3,394,000 and total budgeted expenses of $2,713,339 for revenue less expenditures of $680,661. and that amount includes $200,000 to build reserves. This is important because this is a new fund, and we receive payments to it only twice a year, so we need to make sure that we have reserves for our obligations as the year goes on. And then $300,000 to seed a strategic acquisitions fund so we can be opportunistic with the port, with our colleagues in community development in case there are land acquisitions to be made for development opportunities in the future. And then $180,661 is held aside as a type of contingency or really opportunity funds for implementing economic development plan recommendations. We find through the course of the year and through the alliances that we are building that programs come up that are excellent opportunities and we may not have anticipated. And so we try to have funds like this available in our budget. This will be funded by a transfer from the South Loop Development Fund to the general fund of $894,000 and then our levy request of $2.5 million. Next slide. All right, so some services to continue or expand in 2025. These are things we're already doing and may grow a bit. So offering the commercial and mixed-use development and redevelopment assistance citywide, including TIP applications and grant assistance. This is work that the port has done for a long time and is very familiar to us all. The difference is it continues to go citywide, and that is picking up. Facilitating the application of Bloomington's Opportunity Housing Ordinance in collaboration with HRA and planning. Offering business assistant and retention service to small businesses, early-stage entrepreneurs, and large employers. Offering creative placemaking citywide and supporting the implementation of their citywide plan. Offering creative financial assistance to small businesses through Facade Improvement Grant Program and the Business Retention Program. Participating in regional collaborations such as the CHIPS Coalition. Promoting the city's business environment through events such as the Broker Breakfast, MinCar Expo, and ICSC. And allocated development grant funding to assist development projects or studies citywide. Next slide.
Actually, Mr. President, if I
Yes.
could ask, Holly, if I could just ask the question, all of those things that you mentioned, all the existing services that continue to expand, and the new services that you're going to get to also, but maybe it's on that slide. But how does it work together with the work the communications team is doing? As we talk about trying to market or brand the city or tell our story better, how does this all work together? And should that be a bullet point? Tell our story better, and in conjunction with the communications work that's going on.
Yes, President Erickson, Mr. Mayor, and Commissioners. Actually, that is on the next slide.
Well, there we go.
All right.
Sorry. You can tell me at any time. Just be quiet.
Are you shilling for it?
Thank you so much. He is not a plant. So we will be, in 2025, building operating reserves for the Port Authority, as I have mentioned, launching a strategic acquisitions fund for future land purchases, really building out our partnership that we've mentioned in the past with the Minnesota Small Business Development Center, which is an affiliate of the U.S. SBA, Small Business Association, as well as DEED here in this state, which expands technical assistance offering for small businesses. And I should give Barb and her team a shout out. There was a very large event with this group at the Zawadi Center on Friday night with over 150 people in attendance. So the way we're working with this program is to bring our technical assistance and offerings to different gathering groups throughout the community, rather expecting them to come to us. So we saw great success with that at the Zawadi Center and hope to continue to find different communities to work with to get the message out that there is technical assistance, there's free programming, there are workshops, and the city really wants to work with the business community here. So we will also be promoting the city of Bloomington through marketing, strategic communications, trade shows, etc. There's some dedicated funding there for cross-departmental collaboration, but the communications department also has funding that they have dedicated to hire consultants to help us with our storytelling. That could take several forms. It could be a public relations professional who's helping us with pitches, possibly at the national scale. It could be a rebrand for the city. There are a lot of different ways we could take this. We've also been talking to the trade office here in Minnesota about how they brand Minnesota and how they talk about the community. So we do plan to spend some dedicated time here in collaborations with the communications team next year in this space.
You could have just told me, be patient. We're getting to that.
Okay.
Next slide, so.
All right, and so we also plan to develop more programs for aging commercial areas through the Commercial Nodes Toolkit. That's getting built out as a collaboration with the port, planning, and others in community development. And so that's bringing us programs like the facade improvement grants and really prioritizing the commercial areas of the city that council and others have looked at through the years and would like to see at least updated, if not redeveloped, in the future. We are planning to manage staff of the city's Bloomington internship program for 2025, and then begin launching other recommendations of the 5-year economic development plan. We will be doing an implementation workshop shortly, which will help us decide which of those we'll be looking at in 2025. Next slide, please. Other way. All right, and so you should be familiar with the Port Authority team here. We have the Creative Placemaking Group, which is Alejandra Palenka, and then Catherine Murray. We have the Assistant Port Authority Administrator, Kevin Canese, and then Luke Sponable as the Economic Development Analyst. Will be replacing one of the Economic Development Analyst positions, and then Kenny Niemeyer is a Housing Development Specialist that will be sharing next year 50-50 with the HRA. And then we still have the Senior Analyst position that was filled by Becky Schindler vacant. We are holding that job description open and continuing to talk to Assessing, who we shared the position with, to talk about what our needs might be in the future. And then we have the Assistant Port Authority Administrator, Barb Wolf, who focuses on business assistance, and then we'll be hiring that business assistance specialist to help build capacity in that space moving forward. And then, of course, we have office support with Marit, and then we share staff with finance and with legal. So Mary Kay is our accountant, and then Melissa works with us on behalf of City Legal. Next slide. Thank you very much. So then moving on to the general and development fund budgets. We're showing this together at first, but then we'll separate it into the 2 separate funds. So just as a quick refresher, the general fund is funded by interest on the South Loop Development Fund. It can only be used in the South Loop. There are more restrictions on how we can use that funds. The source of South Loop Development Fund is liquor and lodging tax citywide, but this is interest on that account. And so we've used that for opportunistic programs like exploring the expo opportunity in the past, and it also has just generally financed the staff of the Port Authority as it worked in South Loop. And then the development fund is funded by the levy, so that will be the $2.5 million next year. So total revenues in 2025 anticipated to be $3,394,000. Total expenditures $2,713,339. And then we discussed the revenue less expenditures a little earlier in the program. Next slide.
Commissioner Luntz?
Just a comment. You know, I've lived my whole life looking at things like this, and when you look at the percentage change from 2024, I mean the percent change is 14,795%. It's kind of a meaningless number. I mean, might we? And we fully understand there's been a major change in operations here, but you pull that up and you see that, and just like knocks you over. It's just kind of meaningless. It might be best to just leave it blank, or I don't know, posterity, if anybody's ever going to look at these, but you look at that and you just go, that's just crazy. And the other one is, what's the other one? 83,071%. So I don't know who puts these together for us.
President Erickson, Commissioner Lunz, and Commissioners, this is put together by the Finance Department, and your comment is noted. These are new formats for us in 2025, so I think that edit is well notated, and I don't anticipate us having growth like that in the future.
I checked it; it's correct.
Okay.
But it's like, oh, okay.
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is because you're trying to build some reserves for cash flow purposes, so this is really a one-time thing that you'll see and after this. So you end up going from a negative to obviously the increase, and that's where your difference comes.
All right, thank you. So now on to the general fund. So as we mentioned, that will be $894,000 requested, and then spending $889,000, very close. This is the area that is in the South Loop. This is the funding that we use for that type of work. It funds some staff. It funds some consulting, particularly if we're looking at, we've anticipated a little extra around the water park should that move forward. And we save some funds here to be opportunistic. We still own property in the South Loop, and that still seems to be an area of extreme interest. So we've funded some studies in the past for certain projects, and so we will continue to have this source of resources for the South Loop area in the future. Next slide. All right, and then on to the development fund where you've seen the biggest change. That is the 2.5 million levy that increased by $1 million from the year before. And then moving on to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit of what that change was about. So the new development fund expenses that you see in that line item are $200,000 for operating reserves, which we mentioned, and it's important to have that because of the way this fund comes in twice a year. $300,000 for that strategic acquisitions fund, $75,000 for new small business program. Likely $60,000 of that is committed to the Small Business Development Center joint programming, which is the type of programming we're doing with the Zawadi Center. We've committed $60,000, they've committed $60,000. But occasionally we find other sources for these types of partnerships. $50,000 for marketing and trade shows and strategic communications work. The communications team also has a source of funding that they can bring to the table for this, so we anticipate that actually having a bit more of this as a resource. $100,000 for commercial nodes toolkit opportunities. $45,000 for the contribution to the business retention fund. You may remember this from last year. This was a new fund. It was funded by the city's strategic priorities funds. It's $45,000 a year. Potentially we'll increase it, but we are trying to build a source of funds should small businesses be displaced by development in the future, so we can help facilitate some of their moving costs and make sure they can stay in the community. And then we have $150,000 here for the Small Business Center operating expenses added on. And again, that program is still under consideration. It's been paused. Should we go back to it, we will have this funding available to it. Should we not, the request is that it continue to be focused on equitable economic development work, which I think this team is doing a very good job of identifying opportunities for. Next slide.
Just another question. It's just on this land acquisition fund, and I think I've got the cart ahead of the horse maybe, but is there a protocol set up? I mean, when the port has an opportunity to purchase some property, land, whatever, who does it? And is the process followed the same as if the city itself would be doing that? And like I said, that's probably a premature question, but I was just thought I'd ask it.
President Erickson, Commissioner Lenz, and Commissioners, that is a very good question to ask. I have not been witness to the process before, but my understanding is it's been relatively opportunistic and on a case-by-case basis. However, in the 5-year development plan, we've identified land banking as an area that needs attention. The planning team is already looking at this a bit, taking an inventory of what we own and who owns it. It could be the city that owns it, the Port Authority, the HRA, and then taking a look at how we buy property, when we would buy property, what that criteria might be. So that's not built out yet, but it has been identified as a priority.
And obviously, with that kind of money, we don't have a very big checkbook, so it's hard to do a lot of stuff. I mean, unlike South Loop, where we had more access to funds and could do more, I mean, we really don't have a lot at this juncture, but I do think it's very, very important to have some dollars set aside for things that come up. And in the economic development, we never know. I mean, I'm trying to remember back to the SIC development, but, that came on the screen fairly quickly, and I'm not sure, we were fortunate, I think, to have some South Loop funds and things available there, but it's for the kind of work we're doing, it's critically important. And so what it looks like, Holly, in the budget you're presenting is it's highly likely there may be some additional funds that could be reprogrammed for something else, and that will evolve as time moves on.
President Erickson, Commissioners, that's true, and that is part of how we built out the budget for this year, is to make sure that we can be opportunistic, and there are a few areas of the budget where we can explore how we use those funds. Like the Commercial Nodes Toolkit, we haven't decided what that program will be priority.
Okay,
Next
30
slide.
questions.
Almost through.
So if there's no questions, we have a motion. I'm sorry? All right, go ahead.
All right. So just quickly to review the action steps, you approved the preliminary budget and levy on August 20th here at the Port Authority Commission. City Council approved it on September, the preliminary levy and budget. September 27th, it was filed with the county. November 19th, we came back for a final levy recommendation. December 2nd, the City Council approved the levy. And then December 10th, we're here for the final budget approval, and then we will file with Hennepin County by the end of the year. Next slide, please.
And there is a suggested motion. If in your package, it's on the new package is on page 26, but this is right in front of you. So any further discussion or questions? If not, I would entertain the motion that's up on the screen.
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Commissioner Luntz. Do we have a second? Second by Commissioner Hunt. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor, please signal by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So the next one we have then is the voluminous package. It's kind of a housekeeping detail, but it certainly has a lot of paper with it.
It sure does. Good evening, President Erickson, Mayor Bussey, and Commissioners. We are here requesting approval of a resolution that allows for the execution of a number of agreements related to the parking lease and Estoppel agreement documents for the Alpha 5 properties in the South Loop District. South Loop Investments LLC is refinancing the AC Marriott Hotel, and the lender is asking the port to approve 2 agreements and 2 certificates related to the Alpha parking ramp, which the port owns and leases to South Loop Investments for a 25-year lease term. The Estoppel agreement the Estoppel and agreement reaffirms the terms of the pre-existing lease, confirms there are no undisclosed items or issues, and provides notification procedures to future lenders if any issues do arise. Port and City Legal have reviewed the documents, and City Council approved the resolution components that are specific to the documents that they need to sign yesterday evening, and that was due to the use of the South Loop Development Funds for the construction of the ramp. The port, as owner of the ramp, has to approve those same documents and 2 additional documents contained in your packet. Those are attached in their substantially completed form to this agenda item, and I stand for any questions.
Questions for Kevin? If not, there is a motion in your package on this. Do you have a motion on the screen or no?
No, I apologize.
In the old package, it was on page 105, and the new package is on page 27, and the full resolution is on page 29 and 30. So I would entertain that motion.
So moved.
Commissioner Luntz moves. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Commissioner Bussey seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor, please signal by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. All right. So Hollywood, the next one I think is just a brief one. We want to talk about Mike Palermo, and he's moving
Absolutely.
to HRA. Is Mike here? Wow. Well, all right.
Well, I get to go to all 3 meetings.
So do I, Mike.
I don't know if this is really a formal item, but I'll just take the opportunity to say thank you for the time here. If you haven't heard, I've been promoted to Assistant HRA Administrator. So I'll be now with the HRA working on our CDBG programs, our homeowner rehab programs, and our single family development projects. But yeah, I've enjoyed my time at the Port Authority, and it's been very interesting. And we've got some big projects that I'm really proud of that I've been able to do. So I thank you for guiding me through the way.
Well, Mike, we want to thank you very much. Again, what have you been with the city? 5 years, 6 years?
Coming up on 8 years. Actually.
8 years. Wow. Well, it's always great when we see somebody that is promoted within the city to another position, and so we will miss having you make presentations, although I understand from talking to some people that we're likely to see your face once in a while again.
Yep, probably.
So we want to thank you for your service and wish you well in HRA, and we will be watching with interest your career at the city.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. We then have the Port Authority Administrator updates, Holly.
I will move with great speed. President Erickson and commissioners. Actually, Mike, can you come up real fast? Southtown. Mike's going to just do one quick last update for himself.
You didn't escape yet?
No,
What was I supposed to prepare?
just Southtown update.
Oh, quick update with Southtown. They have submitted kind of a preliminary application for tax increment financing. There were some things that we wanted them to kind of address and make sure to address our concerns that we had with that, our discussion, and talk about more walkability, create more of a block structure on the property, connect better to the bus rapid transit that they're going to hopefully come back with some more detailed plans. They're really high-level plans. I think they mentioned AI created it, so they heard the message. They want to see more detail in that, so they'll come back with that. And with that will be some more finite financial details as well that will help us determine, make the but-for test that but for this funding, the project wouldn't move forward, and be able to address those things that we need to the requirements for tax increment financing.
Well, I think the important thing with Southtown is we had quite a discussion when it first came up. And if you're going to have a mixed-use development, it has to be something that is really mixed use with some substantial things. And so they've apparently gotten that message. And I think it's important for staff to continue to reinforce that with them, that if we're going to do that, we expect to see something that's fairly robust. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on quickly, the 5-year economic development plan that you saw at our last session, those consultants will be back here on December 16th and 17th. We're currently incorporating edits from the commission, and team members will have a mission workshop to compose a new mission for the port on the 16th. They will be presenting to City Council on the 16th. We'll have our implementation workshop on the 17th, and then we plan to be back to present the plan on the January 21st port meeting. Brief Skywater announcement. They have signed a preliminary memorandum of terms valued of up to $16 million with the Chips for America program. So that's the second such announcement here in Bloomington. One of just a few of the initial announcements in the United States. So it's not a final agreement yet, but we expect that coming through. The port has been awarded $50,000 for a business district initiative grant from Hennepin County to supplement the facade improvement grant program for 2025. And that is great because it allows us to give out more funds. You have all heard by now that the city manager has given his notice. Jamie Verbrugge, who's been with the city for 10 years, will have his last day on January 7th. And the mayor was going to give just a quick update on what the plans are for filling that position.
Thank you, Holly. Yes, this being the second time around for me that hiring a new city manager, it'll be interesting. But what we have, we aren't too solid decisions on a couple of things, but we're getting there. For example, an interim city manager position. We figured we were going to need somebody in the interim position for the duration of the search. Haven't put together fully that plan yet. Hopefully by next Monday night at the council meeting, be able to go to the council and get approval of that, and we'll move forward with an interim plan. And similarly, we're just in the beginning stages of working with a search firm to try and figure out what the next steps will be from a search firm perspective. Obviously, the Bloomington manager job is the plum job in the Twin Cities, and it's probably the best in Minnesota. And we expect we could, as I said last night at the council meeting, we could put an ad in the Star Tribune, and I think we'd do just fine from a recruitment standpoint. But I would like to make sure that we really work with the search firm to get the feedback from the council and from boards and commissions in the community and so on, to figure out exactly what this community wants and needs in a new city manager, and then be able to recruit and attract the folks who can check those boxes and meet those needs that the community and the council and the staff and the boards and commissions have brought forward. So I know that we're going to get regardless, we're going to get a great group of candidates, applicants. I have no doubt about that. This is also a plum search firm job, so I know we're going to get a lot of search firm interest in this and hoping to work with us. But all of those details are yet to come. So disappointed that to see Jamie go, but
Has it been 10 years?
It's a little over 9 years. I mean, it's almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years shortly. but obviously Catholic Charities Twin Cities is an outstanding organization. He's going to bring a strong and unique perspective to the organization. We're definitely going to miss him. Good for him, bad for us kind of thing, but I'm excited for him and wishing him well.
Mr. Owens?
Of the job, I presume it's obvious with the amount of real estate we have here and what we have, but I presume it's also financially.
I think it's all the different pieces. It's one of the most complex cities. Certainly, I mean, once you get outside the central cities, it's one of the more complex cities, certainly the most complex suburb. We do fun and exciting things, and we've got challenging, and we've got great opportunities in front of us. So, as I said, this is going to be a very sought after position by a number of folks.
I happened to run into Jamie and talk with him briefly, and he was telling me that he's got 25 years in PERA, so that's another thing that many people, when they get their pension benefits all vested, then they look at something. But he seems really excited about the new position, and I'm sure he'll do a great job on that, just as he's done here. Mayor, do you have any idea of the timeline on this thing? Is it going to be 6 months, a year?
He didn't give us the longest leash, did he?
No, he did not. And I want to make sure we do this correctly. The last time when Mark Bernardson retired and we hired Jamie, I'm trying to remember. I think it was a 4 or 5 month search process, and I would expect it would be something similar this time.
Good.
I think Commissioner Peterson had.
There's one other factor that you look at when you say it's appealing is that this is like the fourth person since 1960, or
Yes.
Yeah.
so it has a history of something that somebody can come and really make their mark on. You know, it's not 3 years and out. It's not 5 years and out. It's, as long as somebody's doing well, and the city has historically done a good job of picking people. As long as you're doing well, and have the support of the community, you can continue at it for a long time.
That's a very good point.
But to the question of pay, it's probably not going to pay very much different than other top suburbs. It's more the kind of interesting nature of the work and the span of control. So,
How long was Bernardson here? 20-some?
24 years.
yeah.
And John Pigeon was what? How many years before that?
Like
30.
22 years.
Yeah, it was some
And
giant number.
but he was in the legal function before. So again, well, at any rate,
So a half century with 3 guys.
Yeah.
So.
so okay.
Two more. Thank you. Thank you, President Erickson and Commissioners. 2 more quick updates for you, and then I know we're running tight on time. So, Water Park, the mall continues to seek debt financing for the project, and so we are in the same place we were in at our last concurrent meeting and approval in April. It's a challenging market. We continue to talk to them on a regular basis, and we'll update you as soon as we know more. With that in mind and the challenge of this market, they may be considering seeking a legislative extension to the deadline for their spending plan TIF. As you may recall, that expires on December 31st of next year. And so they would need to have that funding spent and begin construction. And that is looking like a more and more challenging timeline. So I'm happy to talk more about this. I know we're trying to move this along, but...
Questions for Holly?
Okay, and then one more item. And then the final conclusion that I want to bring to you is you heard about sewer access charges at our last Port Authority meeting. That did go to City Council on December 2nd. City Council held a public hearing. They adopted an ordinance that establishes a city SAC fee of $2,026 per SAC unit for building permit applications submitted after January 1st, 2025. However, for those of you who were not watching, City Council also directed staff to study and bring back by March 31st recommendations regarding potential SAC exemptions or reductions related to affordability, sustainability, and geography. And by that, I believe there's some focus on South Loop and then potential use of the South Loop Development Fund for future sanitary sewer expansions. There is a staff working group that's been on this project all along and will be convening next week to talk about that further and what that might look like. And so we will probably bring that discussion back to you at a future meeting.
Okay. So we can now move on to the last item on the agenda, which is the business survey. And we appreciate, Peter Leatherman, your willingness to move this, because the last time you were here, we spent so much time talking to you and asking you questions and things that I was concerned that if you were first on the agenda, we wouldn't get to any of the other things on the agenda. And so you graciously agreed to change, and we really only have about 14 minutes, or maybe 20, because we have to move to another room for a 6:30 meeting. So again, we may ask you to come back at a later time, and I went through your study. I mean, it's fascinating, and so without further ado.
All right, for the purpose of time, do I have control of this now? I think you do. I do? All right, you do it.
Peter, could I ask that you get to a microphone just so we...
Oh, yes. Yeah, let me just water it.
Thank you.
Mayor. All right, to go through the methodology with everybody, to just refresh. If we go to the first slide, we spoke with 400 randomly selected owners and managers across the Bloomington business community. Interviews were conducted between August 20th and September 20th. Average completion time was 18 minutes, and the non-response rate was 6.5%.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah, but if you look at the time frame, it takes us a month to do it. We're not like those pollsters that call up, and if you don't answer the phone, we're done. We're setting up, especially with owners and managers, we're setting appointments. I'll go through the demographics fairly quickly here. If we go to the next slide, how long has the business been in the community? Now, keep in mind, like I talked with the council last week, the 2021 data, we're about a year into the pandemic. So that does get the asterisk of the pandemic. What we've seen now is greater longevity. Not as much new business coming in the last 5 years. 5% indicated they moved in the last 5 years, 20% in the last 10. So the typical business has been in the community for about 17 years. If we go to the next slide, no real changes in the composition of the type of business. If we go to the next set of demographics, the location, this is self-described. 24% indicated they were along the 35W corridor, 17% each on the 494 strip and the Lyndale Avenue, 12% in the Mall of America, and then remainders all in single digits. Going to the next slide, the full-time employees has changed. We're up about 4 full-time employees from the 2021 survey. Back in 21, it was about 7.5%, 8%. We're just over 12, being the typical number of full-time employees. Similarly, we have an uptick amongst part-time employees. You can see no part-time is down 1/3 to 11%. 1 to 10 is up 9 points. So the typical business between full-time and part-time employees has roughly 20 employees, which is up from about 14.5, 15 employees in 21. Going to the next slide, the age, really no change. Similarly on ethnicity. Continuing, the last set of demographics, 58% indicated male, 41% female, 1% non-binary. We had 6% less business owners versus those that were tenants in the building, and home-based business in this sample was 6%. Going to the first slide, the primary reason for choosing the location, it was this time around what shrunk was location. The typical suburban response for everything, whether it's placing a business or buying a home. And folks pointed to the customer base, the availability of space. Location comes in third, the corporate decision, close to home, and you do have a much larger percent of folks, not only business owners and managers living in the city, but also employees in the typical suburban community. The quality of life in the city, linking back to being a member of the community, the workforce, bought existing. What is, folks, if we go to the next, rating of the business climate? Keeping in mind 2021 and the pandemic, it was 89% favorable. It's now 97%. The rating of the climate, excellent and good. A little bit of a shift from excellent to good, but that's what we see everywhere. Folks are just much less likely to rate something. They're less enthusiastic about everything. Continuing. Ideas for the city to improve the business climate. Well, if you go right to the bottom, we have 79% that say they're unsure or there's nothing. Two items come up, lower property taxes, and as I talked about with council, that is a metro area and a statewide issue, is the property tax concern coming out of the reassessment of everything in 22. And then potentially offering more tax incentives for businesses. How optimistic are they about the future of their business in the city of Bloomington? Really unchanged from 21. 21, we were starting to turn the corner on the pandemic, so optimism was quite high, was 91%, still at 93%, extraordinarily high. Continuing, what's the most serious issue? This is open-ended, and they can tell us anything, and we collapse them down into categories. First off, at the bottom, 23% indicate that there are no serious issues. 3 issues hit double digits. You have the inflation and the economy, better than 1 in 5, followed by high taxes and then high leases. Everything else falls into single digits. Though if we go more in depth on the next slide and go through a series of issues and ask, is this a very serious issue, somewhat serious, not too serious, or not at all serious? The blue is 21, the green is 23. And there are some changes. Even with the pandemic in play, there is more heightened concern now about the general economic condition. As a total, it went down, but as an intense issue, from the very serious one from 37 to 43. The cost of doing business moved from 64 to 72, with a 50% increase in the very serious. The amount of city taxes did go up, and that is a direct throwback to 22, and we've seen this in 23 and 24 across the state of Minnesota. High rent or lease continues to increase. Crime rates, 47 to 56, a little bit of an uptick in the somewhat serious category, and then the rest down the list under a majority. If we continue at the next slide, number of full-time employees. Well, we saw the growth in the number of folks they said that were full-time employees, and we see it on this chart. 17% indicate that it had increased, only 3% said decrease, and 78% remained about the same. This chart's the biggest indicator. This was the pandemic, and you can see it in 21, with 36% indicating that the number of full-time employees have decreased. Continuing, the number of full-time employees during the next 24 months, what do they expect to happen? Well, there was optimism in 21. There still is optimism in 24. We still have 16% indicating that they expect full-time number of employees to increase. Only 2% indicate that they expect it to decrease. What was the overall impact of the pandemic? Well, in the 2021 survey, we asked folks how likely would they be, do they think, projecting forward, that this is going to change how they operate their office. About 8% indicated that they thought it would have a long-term impact in the business operation. 4%, about half of that actually 3 years later come back and say, yes, they have changed where and how employees work after the pandemic. Quite a bit of this, though, is a lot of your workforce, as you saw, is in service, retail, restaurants. It's hard to move a restaurant into a home and change the way you operate a restaurant. The small 4%, has it impacted how much space you need for employees at your location? 24% indicated it had. So roughly about 1.5% of businesses so far. Paying employees, 64% indicate that they offer a combination of payment. 24% are all hourly, 4% all salary, and 8% are all commission. And combining the all hourly and the combination, we asked what percent of your workforce is making $22 an hour. What we tested in 21 was the livable wage of $15 an hour, but looking at current research, it appears we're closer to the 22% level. What we found, it's roughly about 42% of employees in the salary and the hourly in combination are making the $22 an hour. The remaining 58% are less than $22 an hour. How Do they currently offer an apprenticeship or internship? 3 times increase since 21. Obviously, that was impacting the amount of those sorts of things being offered at the time. In the future, 13% indicated very likely, 33% somewhat likely. If we look at standard marketing, you take 50% of the very likely and a quarter of the somewhat likely, which would give you about 15% more businesses that would potentially be offering apprentice or internships, which would bring the total in the community potentially up to roughly around a third. Does the business offer health insurance? 76% indicate that they had. That's a 14% increase from the 2021 survey, which was 62%. Of those that are offering it, 97% offer them to full-time salaried, 95% to full-time hourly, and 21% to part-time employees currently. What percent of the workforce is living in the city of Bloomington? Well, you can see 43% have 70% or more of their employees living in the community. 20% are less than 50%. Typical comes in roughly about 65% of their employees, they indicate, are living in the community. The average commute time then, when you have so many folks actually living in the city, comes in roughly at about 13 minutes. You do have 8% that are 10 minutes or less and 19% over 15 minutes. Percent of the workforce using public transit. Obviously, when you have so many folks living in the city, you're not potentially going to have as much use of the public transit system. So 48% indicate that they don't have any employees using public transit. 31% less than 10%. 19% indicate 10% or more of the workforce. Do they have plans to install EV charging stations? Well, 18% have, which is a 4x change from 2021. Obviously, the current state of the push towards electric vehicles has impacted. At this point in time, 17% indicate that they have plans in the future. 65% do not have any plans. So following through, you have the potential of about a third of businesses in the future having those available. Is 6:20? We're all right.
We actually, Holly indicated we've got a little more time because the meeting is late starting, so we can actually go to 6:30, I guess.
Okay. All right, just flag me down. I'm going to put my phone up here, not to be rude, so I can just monitor time. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Luntz, did you have a?
Again, just a curious question. Has anybody got a feel for what's it cost to put in one electric charging station? Probably how far you have to run the power, I suppose, but I mean, is it?
A charger alone can cost around $10,000 to $15,000. It depends on how close it is to the Commissioner Lund's. It really depends on how close to the building or the infrastructure that's available. So if you're retrofitting, that could really escalate, and it could depend on the quality of the charger as well. If you're doing like a super charger, those are very expensive, but level 2 chargers that you find at hotels, about $10,000. So it's not terribly, yeah.
How many did we put in out here outside the Art Center? 6, 8?
They keep adding more. There's 2 at the Art Center, but we also have our, yeah.
John, you must have electric car. I do. It's plugged in right now, charging.
And right.
No worries. Overall composition of the workforce, I'll just kind of make this, a majority do not employ non-high school graduates. With high school graduates, it comes in the typical business, employs roughly about 28-29%. As far as technical or vocational school grads, typical business is about 25% composed of those, and college graduates, Only 5% say none. If we look, it comes in roughly right at about 20% is the composition. So the largest section is the tech and the VOTech school grads. Rating of the labor pool. In 21, this was an issue. The number of employees available and the quality of employees available. It was 85%, so it was more mitigated than what we saw when we did some statewide business surveys back in 21, up to 96%. On the quantity, that moved from 82 to 95%. So both of those are not any sort of issue in 2024. What's the most important skill or competency for an employee to have for their business? 33% customer service. This is open-ended. They can tell us anything. 3 other items hit double digits: attention to details, communication, and work ethic. And then a variety of things came in at single digits, from promptness to trade skills to math. Going to the next slide, what skills or competencies need to be improved for the future of the labor force as they see it? Communication, 21%. Promptness, 17%. Organization, 13%. Being a team player, 12%. Customer service. So not necessarily the skills to do the job. It's the soft skills of operating within a workforce is what employers are telling us. Availability of a housing is a problem, not so much for owners and managers. But once again, when speaking, the mayor asked the question when I presented, and it's a very fair point. It's important to realize these are owners and managers. This question would be different if it was asked of employees. Traffic congestion. 34% indicate that traffic congestion has impacted their business. This surprised me in light of 494 this summer. I really thought that this would go up, but it did not. Who has it impacted? Primarily both, but it tips towards customers and clients versus employees being able to get to the location. Does a city have enough public transit options? Yes, according to these folks it does, keeping in mind that from their awareness, they have very limited % of their workforce actually using public transit. The importance of access to airport and freeways. Well, it was a bit mitigated in 21 because at that point, a lot of us were still working from home. So we really weren't worried about access to the freeway, and we weren't going as many times to the airport. So the location as an asset to a business, 62% in 21, up to 83%, seeing a value, either very or somewhat important. The city's attitudes and responsiveness towards local business. It was 90%, it went up to 93%. And we're just, I'll do a summary when we get to a few charts here, but when we look at the business community's interaction with the city, it is quite impressive in the feedback that community is giving the city. The job of the mayor and city council was 77-23, moved to 84-13. So a better than 7-to-1 ratio. City Hall, 19% indicated that they had contact with City Hall during the past year, 97% satisfaction. And like I point out, that is extraordinarily high because those folks typically are not contacting the city to say, hey, you're doing a great job. They have an issue. And I guarantee you 97% did not get the answer they wanted. But it's how it's handled. And it's about having a say in being heard and getting your way. And so just an outstanding evaluation from the business community. The overall direction of the city, 89% indicate it's moving in a positive direction. Only 6% said a wrong track. The value of city services. And keep in mind that we saw earlier the concern on property taxes. There's 2 inputs in this question: the service you receive from the city and the amount of taxes paid. We know that people's perception on the amount of taxes has become more hostile. But at the same time, it moves from 82 to 83%. Only 6% rated that value proposition as unfavorable. which really goes to the work the city does in being responsive, in handling the issues, and that overcomes. You can pay more for good service and still think that that is a good value. The business assistant programs, this section was all new, working with Sean and Cynthia and Barb and Holly to come up with this list to test it now 3 years later. And we asked first, had they heard about this? So this is an awareness question. And then if they had, this isn't if they used it. So if they have heard about it, tapping into what they, because you don't have 70% using it, but it's tapping into what they're hearing amongst colleagues. So if we look at city navigation, 70% had heard about it. 69-1 favorable to unfavorable. As we go through the chart, overall, it's a sea of blue instead of a red riptide. The areas for, the movement to the action item coming out of this is the increasing awareness of the program and providing more detail to the program to owners and managers. The idea of business incubators, back in 21, 84% thought it was a good idea. This time, 95% did. We added a question to ask how likely would they be to use an incubator? Because it's always interesting. This is a great idea, but I'm never going to use it. So it's kind of like for somebody else. And that's kind of what we have in play here. 1% or 2% said very likely. So I have that to 1%, 25% of 34%, about 10%. 95% think it's a great idea. About 10% might actually use that sort of service. What about the idea of partnerships with local schools? Absolutely. Folks love partnerships because partnerships means potential cost savings in their minds. And so 93% indicate that it's a good idea. 45% of businesses, we asked them this time, we asked them if they thought it would help their business. And almost a majority thought that it would have the potential with partnerships with local schools with helping their business. Finally, on communication, this time around, 71% indicate that they felt at least somewhat informed about city government, 28% not to or not at all. If we continue, how are folks getting their information? 35% indicate the newsletter, 32% the city website, 12% email, 11% social media. So if you look at just, the city enterprise, what's coming from the city, overwhelmingly, the city is the information conduit for owners and managers. Very atypical for what we see when we look at residents now, where residents have gone over to more informal communications, whether it's social media or whether it's the grapevine. And then if we look at a preference, do they prefer something in print or do they want to push a button on a screen? 36% said the newsletter. So you have, about a third want something in print. Something electronic, 31% the website, emails, city social media, city e-subscriptions. So we have almost 60% preferring electronic. There is a difference in the depth of information provided when you're doing push communication versus the owner manager pulling the information. But the preference right now is about a 2-to-1 factor. So I think that's the last slide. Can't believe I did it that fast.
Fantastic.
So I'd be happy to answer any questions since we have limited time. I won't.
Questions? Rob?
For a comment, I noticed in skill and competency, 7% said they need employees with no skills or no competency.
Oh, that was, that was, there aren't any that are missing. It wasn't that they wanted no skill. Yeah, yes.
Well, it said none.
Yeah, it was none. None came to mind, yes.
Well, it's
I want to
pretty-
hire that person.
Well, maybe they have a strong training program.
It's critically important we do these surveys, and I mean, looking at this, it looks like a pretty good report card for the city. And I think it's just important to keep on doing them so that we see the baselines and stuff. It was very helpful to have the comparison between 21 and 25. What I was wondering is if we looked at our top 20 businesses, and I don't know what the total employment would be if you take the Toros and the Donaldsons and the other ones of the world. And it might be interesting to just focus on that particular segment. I know some of us have at various times gotten some negative feedback from one or two, but I think generally it's been positive. But it might be interesting if that group as a subset is different, and I don't know from your experience whether that's happened, but again, this survey is so important. So we appreciate it, and I guess we've got 3 or 4 minutes to go. I don't know whether this is something that people want to have a further presentation on or think about. Some future session, I guess you can cogitate on that and look at it. I found it just fascinating to go through, and looking at the questions you actually asked the businesses and things was good. Commissioner Hunt.
This one, the population for the questions was a little bit different. The first time around, didn't we use candidates that had been named through the assessing division somehow? And then this one was more truly broad
Yes.
business owners. So a slight modification in the population that was sampled.
Thank you, President and Commissioner Hunt. I'm Barb Wolf, Assistant Port Authority Administrator. We used basically the same database, pulling it from assessing once again. Mm-hmm.
I thought you had expanded it differently this time.
We had difficulty pulling that.
Yes, we're finding with every community we work with, it's amazing the lack of information cities have on businesses and the lack of information the state of Minnesota has.
Huh.
There is a large gap.
Okay. Well, it's 6:27. I guess we want to wish everybody a happy holiday. We'll see you next year. And we are adjourned.